Power without purpose is merely destruction. Purpose without power is merely intention. In the shadowed corridors between light and darkness, between loyalty and betrayal, between memory and oblivion, there existed a figure who embodied this fundamental truth about the Force itself. His name was Galen Marek, though the galaxy would know him by another name entirely, a name whispered in fear by Imperial officers, a name that represented both the greatest weapon Darth Vader ever forged and the spark that would ignite the flame of rebellion against the Empire. This is the story of Starkiller, the legacy of the Marek family. Long before Galen Marek became the apprentice of the Dark Lord of the Sith, before he wielded a crimson lightsaber in service to darkness, there existed a different legacy. The Marek family were guardians of the light, servants of the Force who fought for peace and justice across the galaxy during one of its most turbulent periods. The Clone Wars had engulfed thousands of star systems in fire and blood, transforming the noble Jedi Order into generals of a massive military force. Among these Jedi warriors were two individuals whose choices would reshape galactic destiny in ways they could never have imagined. Galen Marek served the Galactic Republic as a Jedi Knight, wielding both lightsaber and wisdom in equal measure on battlefields that stretched from the core worlds to the Outer Rim. He fought alongside clone troopers against the Separatist droid army, defending worlds from invasion and protecting innocent civilians caught in the crossfire of a conflict orchestrated by forces they couldn't comprehend. Galen was a skilled combatant, but more than that, he possessed a deep understanding of the living Force, that aspect of the mystical energy field that connected all living things in an eternal dance of creation and transformation. On the planet Talos, amid the chaos and violence of war, Galen encountered another Jedi Knight. Her name was Mally, and she fought with a yellow-bladed lightsaber that seemed to burn with the same passion that lived in her heart. Where Galen was contemplative and measured, Mally was fierce and protective, channeling the Force through pure determination to shield those under her care. The two Jedi found themselves fighting side by side, coordinating tactics, watching each other's backs as the battle raged around them. In the moments between combat, when they could catch their breath and tend to the wounded, they began to know one another. The Jedi Code was explicit in its prohibition of emotional attachments. Compassion was encouraged, even mandated, but attachment was seen as a path to suffering, fear, and ultimately to the dark side. The Jedi were meant to serve all beings equally, maintaining emotional distance that would allow them to make difficult decisions without the clouding influence of personal relationships. Marriage and romantic love were forbidden for members of the Order, sacrifices that Jedi made in service to the greater good. Yet despite these ancient prohibitions, despite centuries of tradition and wisdom warning against such connections, Galen and Mally fell in love. They tried to deny it at first. They maintained professional distance, focusing on their duties, throwing themselves into their missions with renewed intensity. But the Force itself seemed to draw them together repeatedly, assigning them to joint operations, placing them on the same battlefields. Eventually, they stopped resisting what had become undeniable. In secret, violating one of the Order's most fundamental tenets, Galen and Mally married. They spoke their vows to one another in private, with no witnesses save the Force itself. binding their lives together in defiance of everything they had been taught. For a time, they continued serving in the Clone Wars, fighting alongside their fellow Jedi while concealing the truth of their relationship. They were careful, maintaining appropriate distance in public, never allowing their emotions to show during briefings or in front of other Jedi. But secrets have weight, and the burden of deception began to wear on them both. Then Mally discovered she was pregnant, and everything changed. The couple faced an impossible choice. They could not remain in the Jedi Order with a child. The pregnancy would eventually become impossible to hide, and the consequences of their violations would be severe, not just for themselves, but potentially for their unborn child. So they made a decision that would save their lives, even as it cost them everything they had known. They deserted the Jedi Order. In the midst of the galaxy-wide conflict, 2 skilled Jedi Knights simply vanished from the war, abandoning their posts, their fellow Jedi, and the Republic they had sworn to defend. They fled to the Outer Rim territories, seeking anonymity in the vast, largely unexplored regions far from the core worlds and the Republic's reach. Their timing, though they couldn't have known it, was impeccable. Within weeks of their desertion, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine issued Order 66. Across the galaxy, clone troopers who had fought alongside Jedi for years suddenly turned their weapons on their commanders. The Jedi, caught completely by surprise, died by the thousands. Jedi Masters, Knights, and Padawans alike were cut down by the very soldiers they had led into battle, victims of a contingency order buried deep in the clones' behavioral modification programming. The Great Jedi Purge had begun, a systematic genocide that would nearly extinguish the ancient order. The clone troopers executed their Jedi officers on thousands of fronts across the galaxy. The temple on Coruscant burned. Younglings were slaughtered. A few Jedi managed to escape, scattering to remote worlds, but most perished in the initial betrayal. Kento and Mally, by deserting the Order before Order 66 was issued, inadvertently saved themselves from immediate execution. However, the rise of the Galactic Empire meant they were now fugitives regardless. Emperor Palpatine declared all Jedi to be enemies of the state, traitors who had supposedly attempted to assassinate him and overthrow the Republic. Even former Jedi, those who had left the Order before the war's end, were hunted by Imperial forces. The couple realized they needed to disappear completely, to find somewhere so remote that even the Empire's vast intelligence network wouldn't think to look. They chose Kashyyyk, the forested homeworld of the Wookiees. The planet's massive raw-sheer trees created a layered ecosystem hundreds of meters tall, with entire communities existing in the upper canopy levels, far from the dangerous shadowlands below. The Wookiees were a proud, honorable people, fierce warriors who valued loyalty and family above all else. When Kento and Mally arrived on Kashyyyk, seeking refuge, they were honest about their situation. The Wookiees welcomed them, understanding the concept of being hunted for who you were rather than anything you had done. They helped the former Jedi build a modest home in one of the tree villages, integrating them into the community. Kento and Mally settled into their new life on Kashyyyk with a mixture of relief and sadness. They were safe, far from the Empire's immediate reach, protected by beings who understood the value of sanctuary. Yet they had lost everything they had once been. No longer Jedi Knights defending the Republic, They were simply two people trying to build a family in exile. The Wookiees became their new community, their protectors and friends. Kento, in gratitude for their hospitality, received a special robe crafted by Wookiee artisans, a gesture of respect and inclusion. He wore it with pride, a symbol of his new identity as part of Kashyyyk's community rather than as a Jedi Knight. Birth and tragedy. In the aftermath of the Clone Wars, as the Galactic Empire consolidated its power and the Jedi Order faded into legend, Mali gave birth to a son. They named him Galen, and from the moment he entered the world, it was clear that he had inherited his parents' connection to the Force. Even as an infant, Galen displayed signs of Force sensitivity, objects moving slightly when he cried, an uncanny awareness of his surroundings that went beyond normal infant perception. Kento and Mali watched their son with both joy and concern. His power was extraordinary, potentially making him one of the most gifted Force users of his generation. In different times, he would have been brought to the Jedi Temple for training, raised as part of an ancient tradition. Now, in the age of the Empire, his abilities made him a target. The young family lived in peace for several years, with Kento and Mali carefully teaching Galen to control his abilities without formal Jedi training. They wanted him to understand the Force, to respect its power, but they also wanted him to have as normal a childhood as possible under the circumstances. The Wookiees adored young Galen, often watching over him while his parents worked, teaching him their language and their customs. For a brief time, despite being fugitives on a backwater world, the Marek family knew happiness. Then disaster struck in a form they had never anticipated. Trandoshan slavers descended on one of the Wookiee villages. The Trandoshans were reptilian predators who viewed the Wookiees as their ancestral enemies, hunting them for sport and profit. The slavers attacked with brutal efficiency, attempting to capture Wookiees to sell into bondage. Mali, hearing the sounds of battle and the cries of their Wookiee friends, could not stand by. Despite Kento's warnings, despite knowing that using her abilities openly might draw Imperial attention, she ignited her yellow-bladed lightsaber and charged into the fray. Mali fought with the same fierce protectiveness that had defined her during the Clone Wars. Her blade became a golden arc of light, cutting down Trandoshan slavers and mercenaries as she defended the Wookiees who had given her family sanctuary. She saved numerous lives that day. Her skill with the lightsaber and her command of the Force proved us more than a match for the heavily armed predators. But the slavers were numerous and well-equipped, and Mali was just one woman against dozens of opponents. As Kento took their young son to safety, Mali made her stand, holding the line so that others could escape. The slavers eventually overwhelmed her through sheer numbers. Mali Marek, Jedi Knight, Mother, and Guardian, fell defending the innocent just as she had during the Clone Wars. Her sacrifice saved countless Wookiee lives, but it left Kento alone to raise their Force-sensitive son in an increasingly dangerous galaxy. The Wookiees mourned her deeply, honoring her memory as they would one of their own fallen warriors. Kento buried his wife on Kashyyyk, the only home she had known since abandoning the Order. He resolved to raise Galen on his own, to teach him everything he could about the Force while keeping him hidden from the Empire's ever-watchful eye. For several years, Kento managed to maintain this precarious existence. He trained Galen in secret, teaching him to meditate, to sense the force flowing through all living things, to control his burgeoning abilities. The boy was remarkably powerful, his connection to the force deepening with each passing year. Kento sometimes wondered if Galen's power might one day rival that of the legendary Jedi Masters of old. But with that power came danger. The more Galen's abilities developed, the more likely it became that his presence in the Force would be detected by those hunting for Force sensitives. Kento's worst fears were realized when Imperial spies learned of the incident with the Trandoshan slavers. The report of a woman wielding a lightsaber on Kashyyyk reached Imperial intelligence, and they correctly deduced that a surviving Jedi might be hiding on the Wookiee homeworld. The Empire wasted no time. Kashyyyk was invaded by a massive Imperial military force, overwhelming the Wookiees' defenses with superior numbers and firepower. The occupation was brutal, with Wookiees being rounded up for slave labor to be used in the construction of the Death Star, the Empire's ultimate weapon. Leading this invasion personally was Darth Vader, the Emperor's apprentice and the most feared enforcer in the galaxy. Vader had once been Anakin Skywalker, a legendary Jedi Knight and hero of the Clone Wars. Now, he was more machine than man, encased in black armor and a life support suit, sustained by the dark side of the Force and an all-consuming rage. Vader's mission was to locate and eliminate any surviving Jedi on Kashyyyk, continuing the great Jedi purge that had begun with Order 66. He cut through Wookiee defenders with mechanical precision, his crimson lightsaber leaving death in its wake as he made his way toward Galen Marek's location. The moment that changed everything. When Darth Vader reached the Marek home, a simple dwelling built high in the Rasha trees, he found exactly what he had expected: a fugitive Jedi trying to hide from the inevitable judgment of the Empire. Galen Marek stood outside his home, lightsaber ignited, blue blade humming in defiance of the Dark Lord. Behind him, inside the house, young Galen hid, terrified but unable to look away from the confrontation about to unfold. Galen knew he was outmatched. He could sense Vader's power in the Force, an overwhelming presence of darkness that seemed to suffocate the light around it. But he would not run, would not abandon his home and his son without a fight. The duel was brutally one-sided. Galen fought with everything he had, employing every technique he had mastered during his years as a Jedi Knight. He shifted between combat forms, trying to find an opening in Vader's defense, attempting to use his knowledge of the environment to gain any possible advantage. But Vader's strength was overwhelming. The Dark Lord parried every strike with contemptuous ease, his mechanically enhanced power allowing him to press the attack relentlessly. Vader's style was adapted Form 5, Gem. So, an aggressive variant that emphasized overwhelming offense and strength. Against it, Kento's more balanced approach found no purchase. Vader drove Galen back, step by step, his red blade battering through the Jedi's defenses. Kento's muscles burned with effort, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he struggled to keep up with the Dark Lord's assault. He could feel his strength fading, knew that this fight had only one possible ending. In a final desperate move, Galen tried to use the Force to throw Vader off balance, to gain a moment's reprieve. Vader simply absorbed the Force push, his power far exceeding the fugitive Jedi's capabilities. With a contemptuous flick of his wrist, Vader disarmed Kento, sending his lightsaber spinning away into the trees below. Galen Marek stood defenseless before the Dark Lord of the Sith, breathing heavily, prepared to face death with whatever dignity he could muster. Vader's mechanized breathing filled the air, the rhythmic hiss whoosh sound that had become synonymous with death for those who opposed the Empire. Vader raised his lightsaber, prepared to execute another surviving Jedi, another loose end to be eliminated in service to the Emperor. But before the killing blow could fall, something extraordinary happened. Vader's lightsaber suddenly ripped itself from his grip, flying through the air as if pulled by an invisible hand. The lightsaber landed in the small hands of a child. Young Galen Marek had emerged from the house, unable to watch his father die without trying to do anything. The boy didn't understand what he was doing, didn't know that he was using the Force to disarm one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He only knew that he had to stop the monster trying to kill his father. Acting on pure instinct and raw emotion, Galen had reached out with the Force and pulled Vader's weapon away from him, a feat that would have been impressive for a trained Jedi Knight, let alone a child of perhaps 6 or 7 years old. For a moment, Darth Vader simply stared at the boy who had disarmed him. Behind his mask, invisible to those watching, the Dark Lord's eyes widened in genuine surprise. The raw power required to wrench a lightsaber from his grip through pure Force ability was substantial. For a child to accomplish such a feat without training spoke to an absolutely extraordinary connection to the Force. Vader could sense the boy's potential, could feel the power radiating from him like heat from a sun. This was no ordinary Force-sensitive child. This was someone who could potentially become one of the most powerful Force users in galactic history. In that moment, Darth Vader made a decision that would alter the course of the galaxy. The Sith rule of two, established by Darth Bane a millennium earlier, stated that there should only ever be two Sith, a master and an apprentice. Vader already served Emperor Palpatine as his apprentice, bound to the elderly Sith Lord through chains of loyalty, fear, and the dark side itself. But Vader had never forgotten his own dreams of power, had never truly abandoned his desire to overthrow his master and rule in his place. Seeing young Galen's potential, Vader recognized an opportunity. If he could train this boy in secret, mold him into the perfect weapon, perhaps together they could finally destroy Palpatine and claim the Empire for themselves. Vader turned back to Kento, who watched in horror as he realized what was about to happen. The Dark Lord's crimson blade ignited once more, and this time there was no hesitation, no final words. Vader struck Kento down in front of his son, killing the last obstacle to claiming the boy. But even in death, Galen Marek managed a small act of defiance. As he fell, he used the last of his strength to speak a single word to his son, a message that would remain buried in Galen's subconscious for years to come. Then, Galen Marek became one with the Force, leaving his young son alone with the monster who had just destroyed his world. Galen stood there, holding Vader's lightsaber in his small hands, too young to fully process what had just happened. Vader reclaimed his weapon with a gesture, the hilt flying from the boy's grasp back to the Dark Lord's hand. But Vader's attention was drawn to movement behind him. A squad of stormtroopers, having followed their commander to this location, emerged from the trees. They had witnessed everything: the duel, the child's intervention, the presence of a Force sensitive in their midst. This was a problem. Vader's intention to secretly train an apprentice required absolute secrecy. The Emperor could never learn that Vader was grooming a replacement. Without hesitation, Vader turned on the stormtroopers and cut them all down. His lightsaber moved with lethal efficiency, and in seconds, the entire squad lay dead, their white armor scorched and broken. Vader had just killed Imperial soldiers to protect his secret, a treasonous act that revealed the depth of his ambition. He then turned back to young Galen, who had watched his father die and now witnessed the murder of Imperial troops. The boy was in shock, traumatized beyond words, but Vader could sense that the seeds of darkness were already taking root. The child's fear and pain were powerful, raw emotions that the dark side could feed upon. Vader reached out with the Force and lifted the child into the air with telekinesis, pulling him close. Galen struggled at first, but he was no match for the Dark Lord's power. Vader carried the boy to his ship, leaving behind the bodies of Galen Marek and the Imperial soldiers, abandoning the home that Galen had known his entire life. The child looked back one last time at the place where his father had fallen, where his innocent childhood had ended, burning the scene into his memory. Then Vader's ship lifted off from Kashyyyk, carrying away the boy who would become Starkiller. Behind him, the Wookiee homeworld continued burning under the Imperial occupation, countless beings enslaved or killed in the Empire's relentless expansion. The making of a monster aboard Vader's ship, young Galen Marek began a transformation that would reshape him into something entirely different from what his parents had intended. Vader took the boy to his personal flagship, the Executor, a superstar destroyer that was still under construction but already operational enough to serve as the Dark Lord's mobile base. Deep in the bowels of this massive warship, in quarters that rarely saw natural light, Vader began molding his new acquisition into the weapon he needed. The boy was given a code name to replace his birth name, Starkiller, a name that evoked both power and destruction. The training that followed was nothing short of brutal. Vader's methods bore no resemblance to the patient, nurturing approach the Jedi took with younglings and Padawans. There was no gentle introduction to the Force, no philosophical discussions about balance and responsibility. Instead, Vader controlled the boy through fear, attacking him without warning, subjecting him to physical tests that bordered on torture. Starkiller learned quickly that failure meant pain, that weakness was unacceptable, that the only way to survive in Vader's world was to embrace the anger and hatred that the dark side demanded. In the beginning, Vader used simple fear to control his young apprentice. The boy lived in constant terror of his master, never knowing when the next test would come, when the next punishment would be delivered for perceived failure. But as Starkiller grew older, Vader's approach evolved. He began teaching the boy to harness his base emotions, to channel his anger, his pain, his hatred into power. The dark side of the Force fed on these negative emotions, transforming them into supernatural abilities that exceeded what the light side could offer. Vader promised his apprentice greater power through the dark side, painting a picture of limitless potential if only Starkiller would fully embrace his training. Vader allowed the boy no friends or companions save for a prototype holodroid designated Proxy. This unusual droid had been specifically designed to assist in Starkiller's training through an extraordinary and unsettling feature. Proxy could use advanced holographic technology combined with built-in servos to physically transform himself into virtually any humanoid form. More than that, Proxy had been programmed with combat modules representing some of the greatest warriors in galactic history. The droid could assume the appearance and fighting style of legendary Jedi and Sith, providing Starkiller with an ever-changing array of opponents to fight. But Proxy's primary directive was even more disturbing. The droid had been programmed to attempt to kill Starkiller whenever an opportunity presented itself. This was not a malfunction, but an intentional part of his design. Vader wanted his apprentice to learn that he could trust no one, that even his only companion was a potential threat. The constant danger kept Starkiller alert, honing his survival instincts, forcing him to remain perpetually prepared for combat. Oddly, despite Proxy's programming to kill him, Starkiller developed a genuine friendship with the droid. Proxy's failures to complete his primary directive became a kind of game between them, and the droid himself seemed conflicted about his purpose, apologizing after each assassination attempt, even as he promised to try again. Starkiller's days blurred together into an endless cycle of training, meditation, and combat. He had no formal education, no exposure to art or culture, no understanding of normal human interaction. His entire existence revolved around becoming a more perfect weapon for Vader to wield. The Dark Lord personally oversaw much of the training, subjecting his apprentice to rigorous physical tests that pushed the limits of human endurance. During these sessions, Vader would attack the boy relentlessly, his superior strength and experience overwhelming the young apprentice again and again. Starkiller learned to accept pain, to fight through injuries, to draw on his anger and hatred, to keep going when his body screamed for him to stop. The apprentice's training included extensive work with lightsaber combat. Vader first taught him the basics of Form 5, his own preferred style, emphasizing power and aggressive offense. But as Starkiller's skills developed, Vader encouraged him to explore other forms as well, to become proficient in multiple combat styles. Proxy's combat modules provided ideal training partners, allowing Starkiller to duel against holographic representations of masters of different lightsaber forms. The young apprentice fought against simulated versions of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Darth Maul, and other legendary warriors, each encounter teaching him new techniques and strategies. Starkiller also received training in the use of Force powers, particularly those aligned with the dark side. He learned to channel Force lightning through his fingertips, sending arcs of deadly electricity into his opponents. He mastered telekinesis to a degree that few could match, becoming capable of lifting and hurling massive objects with apparent ease. He developed Force Repulse, a devastating technique that could blast opponents and objects away from him in all directions simultaneously. His Force grip could choke enemies from across a room or crush their bodies with invisible pressure. These were the tools of a Sith assassin, powers designed not for defense or peacekeeping, but for destruction and domination. Perhaps most importantly, Vader trained Starkiller to suppress his emotions when necessary, to maintain control even when fueled by rage and hatred. The dark side required passion and strong emotions to access its full power, but those same emotions could lead to recklessness if not properly directed. Starkiller learned to exist in a state of controlled fury, channeling his anger precisely rather than allowing it to consume him entirely. This discipline, combined with his raw power, made him an extraordinarily dangerous opponent despite his youth. As the years passed, young Galen's memories of his early childhood faded. The trauma of watching his father's murder, combined with Vader's brutal training regimen, caused the boy to repress everything about his life before becoming Starkiller. He forgot his birth name, forgot his parents' faces, forgot the gentle lessons his father had tried to teach him about the Force. His earliest clear memories became those of his training aboard the Executor, of Proxy's assassination attempts, of Vader's lessons in the dark side. The boy who had lived peacefully on Kashyyyk effectively died, replaced by something else entirely. Starkiller became entirely focused on his training, on proving his worth to his master, on becoming powerful enough to stand at Vader's side. The isolation was profound. Starkiller had no peers, no friends beyond the homicidal droid. He knew nothing of the wider galaxy except what Vader chose to tell him, which was precious little. He existed in a bubble of darkness, trained to be a weapon, never questioned about his wants or needs or dreams. The concept of personal choice was foreign to him. He had been shaped into exactly what Vader needed, a powerful Force user absolutely loyal to the Dark Lord, lacking any attachment to the Jedi or their philosophy, willing to kill without hesitation or remorse. Starkiller subjected himself to extreme self-imposed trials to accelerate his development. On one memorable occasion, he had Proxy chain him in complete darkness and deprive him of food, with instructions not to release him until he successfully assembled a lightsaber through telekinesis alone. The exercise ultimately failed after days of suffering, but Starkiller felt it had strengthened his resolve and his connection to the Force. He would stare at his ignited red lightsaber blade during meditation, using the color to inspire thoughts of anger and violence, deliberately cultivating the mindset required to channel the dark side. These were not the actions of someone forced into servitude against their will. Starkiller embraced his training, seeking to prove himself worthy of the destiny Vader had described for him. By the time Starkiller reached his teenage years, he had become an extraordinary warrior. His mastery of lightsaber combat and Force abilities exceeded what many Jedi Knights had achieved after decades of training. But Vader continued to push him, continued to test him, always seeking to draw out more power, more skill, more darkness. The Dark Lord spoke often of their ultimate purpose. They were training for the day when they would face Emperor Palpatine together, when Master and Apprentice would overthrow the reigning Dark Lord of the Sith and claim the galaxy for themselves. Starkiller lived for that promised future, dreaming of the day when he would stand as a true Sith Lord rather than a secret apprentice. At age 15, Starkiller began undertaking actual missions for his master. These initial assignments were not yet Jedi hunting operations, but rather targeted eliminations of Vader's rivals and enemies within the Imperial power structure. Vader had many enemies, officers and administrators who sought to undermine his position or curry favor with the Emperor at the Dark Lord's expense. Starkiller became the instrument of Vader's revenge against these internal threats. He infiltrated Imperial facilities, assassinated high-ranking officers, destroyed evidence of plots against his master. These missions honed the young assassin's practical skills, teaching him stealth, tactics, and the art of killing efficiently. For these operations, Vader provided Starkiller with an advanced prototype starship called the Rogue Shadow. This vessel featured cutting-edge cloaking technology that made it nearly invisible to sensors, allowing Starkiller to approach targets without detection. The ship was fast, maneuverable, and heavily modified with systems optimized for insertion and extraction operations. It became Starkiller's home, away from the Executor, a mobile base where he could plan and prepare between missions. The Rogue Shadow represented freedom of a sort, the ability to move through the galaxy pursuing his objectives without Vader constantly looming over his shoulder. Through it all, Vader promised that these early missions were merely preparation for Starkiller's true purpose. The apprentice's ultimate test, the task that would prove him worthy to stand at Vader's side against the Emperor, would be the hunting and elimination of surviving Jedi. These fugitives, who had escaped Order 66 and the subsequent purge, represented the last remnants of the Order that had once dominated the galaxy. If Starkiller could defeat trained Jedi Masters, warriors who had survived both the Clone Wars and the Empire's relentless hunt, then he would truly be ready for the confrontation with Palpatine. Starkiller waited eagerly for this opportunity. He had been forged in darkness, shaped by pain and fear and hatred into the perfect weapon. His entire existence had meaning only in service to Vader's ambitions. He knew no other life, wanted no other life. The boy who had once been Galen Marek, son of Kento and Mele, was gone, buried beneath layers of Sith conditioning and repressed trauma. In his place stood Starkiller, apprentice to Darth Vader, future Sith Lord, ready to write his name in blood across the stars. The galaxy had no idea that this weapon even existed, hidden in the shadows by Vader's obsessive secrecy. But soon, very soon, Starkiller would be unleashed, and the last surviving Jedi would learn to fear a name that would herald their doom. The stage was set. The weapon was forged. All that remained was to point it at the target and watch the destruction unfold. Vader had created something truly dangerous, an apprentice whose raw power and ruthless training made him a threat to virtually anyone in the galaxy. But the Dark Lord had also created something he didn't fully understand. Beneath the conditioning, beneath the dark side corruption, beneath the layers of rage and hatred, a spark of something else remained. A memory too deeply buried to surface. A connection to light that refused to be completely extinguished. This contradiction between what Starkiller had been shaped into and what he might have been would become the fault line along which his entire world would eventually shatter. But for now, in these final moments before his first true mission began, Starkiller remained absolutely convinced of his purpose and his destiny. He was ready to hunt Jedi. He was ready to kill for his master. He was ready to take his place in the grand design Vader had painted for him. What he wasn't ready for was the possibility that everything he believed might be a lie. The mission briefing came through proxy as it always did. The holodroid's form shimmered and transformed, taking on the appearance of Darth Vader himself, the Dark Lord's image speaking with his distinctive mechanical breathing, providing punctuation to each sentence. The target was identified as General Ram Kota, a Jedi Master who had survived Order 66 and had been operating in open defiance of the Empire ever since. Unlike most surviving Jedi who went into hiding, Kota had gathered his own personal militia and was actively attacking Imperial facilities. This brazenness had finally drawn Vader's attention, and now Starkiller would be sent to eliminate this threat. Kota's current location was Nar Shaddaa, the infamous smuggler's moon, orbiting the Hutt-controlled world of Nal Hutta. The Jedi general had led his militia in an assault on an orbital TIE fighter construction facility, a massive industrial platform hanging in space above the polluted cityscape. Vader's orders were explicit and brutal. Starkiller was to kill General Kota, but more than that, he was to leave no witnesses. Everyone at the facility, Imperial personnel included, was to be eliminated to ensure that no one could report the existence of Vader's secret apprentice. This wasn't just an assassination. This was a massacre in the making. For this mission, Vader assigned Starkiller a new pilot for the Rogue Shadow. Her name was Captain Juno Eclipse, and she represented the 8th pilot to be given this assignment. The previous 7 had either died during missions or been executed by Vader for knowing too much about the apprentice's existence. Starkiller met his new pilot with cold indifference. He knew she was likely doomed from the start, just another expendable piece in Vader's grand design. There was no point in learning about her or forming any kind of connection. She was simply a tool to transport him to the target, nothing more. Proxy, ever the information gatherer, accessed Imperial records to provide Starkiller with details about his new pilot. Juno Eclipse had graduated from the Imperial Academy with high honors, had commanded her own squadron, and had proven her loyalty during the bombing of Kalos, an operation that resulted in the near-total destruction of an already beaten world. She was young, highly skilled, and fanatically loyal to the Empire. At least, that's what her record indicated. Proxy's analysis of her psychological profile suggested she would be impossible to reprogram due to her patriotic devotion. Starkiller barely paid attention to these details. Pilots were replaceable. The mission was what mattered. The Rogue Shadow dropped out of hyperspace near Nar Shaddaa and immediately found itself in the middle of a battle. Kota's militia was engaged in a fierce firefight with Imperial forces around the TIE fighter construction facility. Starfighters screamed through the void. Turbo laser fire laced between capital ships, and explosions blossomed in the vacuum like deadly flowers. Juno's skill as a pilot immediately became apparent as she navigated through the chaos, using the Rogue Shadow's cloaking device to slip past both sides of the conflict and insert Starkiller into the facility itself. Once inside the massive orbital platform, Starkiller moved with lethal efficiency. The facility was a war zone, with Kota's militia fighters and Imperial stormtroopers killing each other in desperate firefights across the catwalks and assembly lines. Starkiller cut through both sides with equal ruthlessness. His crimson lightsaber burned through malicious soldiers who thought they were fighting for freedom, through stormtroopers who believed they were defending the Empire, through anyone who had the misfortune to stand between him and his target. The dark side surged through him, amplifying his already formidable abilities, allowing him to deflect blaster bolts with casual ease and tear through obstacles with telekinetic force. The path to Kota led through corridors slick with blood and scorched by blaster fire. Starkiller encountered no real opposition. These were ordinary soldiers, brave perhaps, but utterly outmatched by a Force user of his caliber. He threw them aside with telekinetic blasts, electrocuted them with Force lightning, cut them down with his lightsaber. The body count rose rapidly as he pushed deeper into the facility. This was what he had been trained for, what he had been created to do. He felt no remorse for the dead, no hesitation about following orders that would leave hundreds of innocents dead. Vader had shaped him well. Finally, in a large assembly chamber near the heart of the facility, Starkiller found his target. General Ram Kota stood ready, his green lightsaber ignited, a stocky man with a thick beard and the bearing of someone who had seen too much war. The Jedi general studied his approaching enemy with the calm of a seasoned warrior. He had fought in the Clone Wars, had commanded troops in hundreds of battles, had survived the purge that claimed most of his brothers and sisters. He was not about to go quietly into the darkness. Kota spoke first, his voice carrying an edge of contempt. He mocked Vader for sending a boy to do his work, expressed disappointment that the Dark Lord hadn't come himself. Starkiller responded with action rather than words, launching himself at the Jedi with ferocious intensity. Their lightsabers clashed, blue against green, the sound of contained plasma ringing through the chamber. The duel began in earnest, and despite Kota's experience and skill, he immediately found himself on the defensive. Starkiller attacked with the relentless aggression that Vader had drilled into him. His style was raw power channeled through Form 5 techniques, each strike designed to overwhelm rather than outmaneuver. Kota fought back with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dueled countless opponents, his defense solid and his counters well-timed. But age and exhaustion were taking their toll on the older Jedi. He had been fighting for hours already, his troops were being slaughtered around him, and now he faced an opponent whose youth and dark side enhancement gave him seemingly limitless energy. The battle raged across the assembly chamber. Starkiller used the environment to his advantage, hurling pieces of machinery at Kota with the Force, forcing the Jedi to divide his attention between the lightsaber duel and the telekinetic assault. Kota adapted as best he could, using his own Force abilities to deflect or redirect the objects thrown at him, but the constant pressure wore him down. His parries became slower, his movements less precise. Starkiller sensed victory approaching and pressed harder, his attacks becoming a blur of crimson light. In a critical moment during a saber lock, as their blades crossed and held, Kota's eyes met Starkiller's. The Jedi's expression shifted from determination to something else entirely. His Force-enhanced perception had granted him a glimpse of the future, a vision of what was to come. He spoke words that seemed nonsensical at the time, words Starkiller barely registered. Kota saw that Vader thought he had turned his apprentice, but the Jedi sensed Starkiller's future, and in that future, Vader wouldn't always be his master. The vision confused the old Jedi, for what he saw was himself somehow connected to this dark side assassin. Starkiller, irritated by Kota's apparent attempts at psychological manipulation, responded with brutal directness. He forced his lightsaber forward, breaking the lock and driving the blade into Kota's eyes, deliberately blinding the Jedi Master. Kota screamed in agony as his vision was seared away, his lightsaber falling from his grasp. Starkiller followed up with a powerful force push that sent the blind Jedi flying backward through the facility's viewport, ejecting him into space. As far as Starkiller was concerned, the mission was complete. Coda was blind, disarmed, and adrift in vacuum. No one survived that. Following Vader's orders to the letter, Starkiller proceeded to destroy the entire TIE fighter construction facility, killing everyone aboard. Explosions rippled through the orbital platform as he sabotaged critical systems, ensuring that no witnesses would survive to report what they had seen. As the facility tore itself apart, Starkiller made his way back to the rogue shadow where Juno was waiting. He carried Coda's lightsaber as proof of his victory, as Vader had instructed. The weapon would become a trophy, a symbol of another Jedi fallen to Vader's secret apprentice, trials in the temple. Before Vader would send him after the next target, the Dark Lord ordered Starkiller to return to Coruscant for additional training. The Jedi Temple, once the sacred heart of the Jedi Order, now stood as a monument to the Empire's victory over its ancient enemies. The massive structure still dominated Coruscant's landscape, but Emperor Palpatine had declared it off-limits to the general public, posting Imperial garrisons to guard against intruders. Vader had special clearance to use the temple for his own purposes, and he sent Starkiller there to undergo trials that would test more than just his combat abilities. When Juno piloted the rogue shadow to Coruscant and landed outside the temple, Starkiller disembarked only to be immediately confronted by the Imperial garrison. The soldiers informed him that the Emperor himself had placed the temple off-limits. Starkiller had little patience for this bureaucratic obstacle. His response was swift and violent. He attacked the garrison, cutting through even highly trained Imperial guardsmen with ease. His destructive capabilities and tactical knowledge overwhelmed defenders who had been expecting to deal with the occasional curious civilian or treasure hunter. Bodies littered the temple steps as Starkiller forced his way inside. The interior of the Jedi Temple was a ruin, deliberately damaged during Order 66 and the subsequent occupation. Many sections had collapsed or been blocked off. The grand halls that once echoed with the voices of younglings and the wisdom of masters now stood silent, except for the wind whistling through broken windows. Starkiller made his way through the rubble, fighting occasional pockets of Imperial resistance, until he reached the areas Vader had specified for his training. These trials were different from the purely physical tests Starkiller had endured aboard the Executor. The Jedi Temple retained a strong connection to the Force, and within its walls, the boundaries between past and present, between reality and vision, grew thin. Vader was using the temple's unique properties to force Starkiller to confront aspects of himself that purely physical training couldn't address. The dark side thrived on negative emotions, but it also required a certain degree of self-awareness. A weapon that didn't understand its own mind could be unpredictable, unreliable. Vader needed to know that his apprentice's commitment to the dark side was absolute. In one of the damaged halls, Starkiller encountered what appeared to be a spectral figure, a manifestation brought forth by the Force, or perhaps by his own subconscious. This was a test of insight, of facing oneself without flinching. The spirit took the form of ancient Sith lords, warriors who had died millennia before, but whose presence lingered in the Force. First came Darth Desolus, a Sith Lord from thousands of years past, his shade wielding impossible weapons and attacking with techniques lost to time. The battle-tested Starkiller's adaptability, his ability to counter unfamiliar fighting styles. Later, during another visit to the temple, Starkiller faced the manifestation of Darth Phobos, an ancient Sith whose power was rooted in creating fear. The shade shifted forms constantly, becoming a gallery of horrors designed to unnerve and distract. At one point, it assumed the appearance of someone Starkiller didn't consciously recognize, but who stirred deep, buried emotions. The form was that of a woman, someone who radiated warmth and life. For just a moment, Starkiller hesitated, confused by the unfamiliar sensation the vision provoked. Then he pushed the confusion aside and destroyed the apparition, refusing to let psychological manipulation weaken his resolve. These trials in the temple served another purpose beyond testing Starkiller's commitment to the dark side. Unknown to the apprentice, the Force was trying to show him fragments of truth, offering him glimpses of a past he had forgotten and a future he didn't yet understand. The visions were subtle, easily dismissed as nothing more than the temple's residual Force energy playing tricks, but they planted seeds of doubt that would eventually grow into something more significant. For now, though, Starkiller emerged from each trial more convinced than ever of his path. He had faced fear, illusion, and the phantoms of ancient Sith, and he had prevailed every time. He was ready for whatever came next. Darkness on Raxus Prime. Proxy delivered the next mission briefing in the guise of Darth Vader. The target was Kazdan Paratus, a Jedi Master who had escaped Order 66 and fled to the junk world of Raxus Prime. Paratus was an Alina, a small quadrupedal species, and according to Imperial records, he had been one of the Order's finest technicians and builders. His skills with machines and droids had been legendary among the Jedi. Vader described him dismissively as an outcast, a pathetic figure driven mad by isolation and guilt over abandoning his fellow Jedi during the Purge. The Dark Lord wanted Paratus eliminated to prove that Starkiller could defeat more than just an old man like Kota. Paratus represented a different kind of Jedi Master, one whose strengths lay in areas other than pure combat. Raxus Prime was a nightmare world, a planet-wide junkyard where the galaxy's industrial civilizations dumped their refuse. Mountains of scrap metal towered kilometers high, toxic rivers of industrial waste flowed between them, and the atmosphere was thick with pollution. Native Jawas scavenged through the endless garbage alongside Rhodian salvage crews who fought constant territorial wars over the most valuable debris fields. The Empire had established a presence on Raxus Prime to exploit its valuable salvage, particularly to strip old Separatist ships for useful components. An Imperial ore cannon, a massive weapon designed to fire processed metal into orbit, dominated one of the scrapyards, feeding material to an orbital shipyard. When the rogue Shadow approached Raxus Prime, Starkiller could sense something wrong with the world even before landing. The Force felt twisted here, corrupted not by the dark side, but by something else, something mechanical and wrong. Juno set them down at a distance from Paratus' known location, and Starkiller disembarked into a landscape that seemed actively hostile. He immediately found himself caught in the middle of a three-way conflict between Imperial forces, Rhodian salvagers, and native Jawa clans, all fighting for control of different sections of the junkyard. Starkiller cut through all sides of the conflict with equal indifference, advancing toward the strange structure that Proxy's scans had identified as Paratus's location. As he drew closer, the structure's nature became clear and deeply disturbing. Kazdan Paratus had used scrap metal and salvaged materials to construct a replica of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. This junk temple was a mad echo of the real thing, crude and broken, but clearly recognizable. Surrounding it were dozens of droid effigies, mechanical approximations of Jedi Masters that Paratus had known, each one a tragic monument to the order he had abandoned. Inside the junk temple, Starkiller found Kazdan Paratus himself, a small alien consumed by guilt and madness. The Jedi Master had spent years in isolation, his mind fracturing under the weight of his cowardice during Order 66. He had tried to recreate the Order from garbage, surrounding himself with mechanical ghosts of the Jedi he had failed to save. When Starkiller appeared, Paratus initially mistook him for another Jedi, before recognizing the truth. The Mad Master activated his droid warriors and attacked, fighting to defend his pathetic recreation of a lost world. The battle that followed was bizarre and tragic. Paratus fought with surprising skill despite his small size and obvious insanity, using the Force to control multiple junk droids simultaneously while engaging Starkiller directly. His cybernetic appendages allowed him to increase his stature and climb walls, giving him mobility that compensated for his lack of physical strength. He hurled debris at Starkiller with telekinetic force, using the junkyard environment as an extension of his will. For a time, the Mad Jedi actually posed a genuine threat, but ultimately, Paratus's madness was his downfall. His thoughts were chaotic, his tactics erratic. Starkiller adapted to the unpredictable fighting style and began systematically destroying the junk droids that Paratus was controlling. With each droid that fell, the Jedi Master's power diminished. Eventually, Starkiller managed to land a devastating blow, crushing Paratus beneath a massive piece of machinery. As the life faded from the Jedi Master's eyes, he spoke his final words, apologizing to the droid effigies around him for failing them once again. Then, Kazdan Paratus died, another victim of Order 66, albeit years after the fact. Starkiller left the junk temple without looking back, uninterested in the tragedy he had just witnessed. To him, Paratus was simply another target eliminated, another step toward proving himself worthy of standing beside Vader against the Emperor. The mission was complete. He had defeated a Jedi Master, even one driven mad by isolation. But Vader's words echoed in his mind, an old man and an outcast. These victories weren't impressive enough. Vader demanded more. He demanded that Starkiller face a true Jedi Master, someone who represented the Order at its finest. Only then would the apprentice be ready for his ultimate purpose. The Jedi Master. After another trial in the Jedi Temple, this time confronting manifestations designed to test his insight and resolve, Proxy delivered the mission that would change everything. The target was Shaak Ti, and just the name made Starkiller pause. Shaak Ti was not some half-mad recluse or aging general. She had been a member of the Jedi High Council, one of the Order's most respected leaders. She was a skilled warrior, a wise teacher, and a survivor of countless battles during the Clone Wars. If Starkiller could defeat her, it would prove beyond any doubt that he was ready to face the Emperor himself. Shaak Ti had gone into hiding on Felucia, a planet in the Outer Rim, known for its incredibly abundant and aggressive plant life. The world was a riot of color and danger, with massive fungi towering hundreds of meters tall, carnivorous plants that could swallow a human whole, and native Felucian tribespeople who had adapted to the planet's lethal ecosystem. The force was strong on Felucia, permeating every living thing, creating a web of interconnected life that could be felt by anyone sensitive to its presence. Shaak Ti had chosen this world deliberately, hiding among the teeming life where her presence in the Force would be masked by the planet's natural vitality. The rogue Shadow's approach to Felucia did not go unnoticed. Shaak Ti sensed the ship's arrival and correctly deduced that Vader had finally found her. She ordered her Padawan, a young girl named Maris Brood, who had survived Order 66 before becoming the Jedi Master's apprentice, to stay hidden and not interfere. Then she commanded the Felucian warriors she had been training to intercept Vader's agent. Shaak Ti would not go quietly. If death had finally come for her, she would face it as she had faced every other challenge in her long life, with dignity, courage, and absolute commitment to the Jedi way. Starkiller disembarked from the rogue Shadow into a jungle that seemed almost alive with malevolent intent. The plant life writhed and shifted, responding to the disturbance his presence caused in the forest. Felucian warriors attacked from the undergrowth, blue-skinned natives wielding primitive weapons, but enhanced by rudimentary force training. They were more challenging than normal opponents, their force sensitivity making them harder to predict and more resilient. But they were still no match for someone of Starkiller's caliber. He cut through them efficiently, pushing deeper into the jungle toward the source of the powerful force presence he could sense calling to him. The journey through Felucia was unsettling in ways that Starkiller didn't fully understand. The planet's balance had shifted since Shaak Ti's arrival, tilting away from the light side towards something darker, more primal. Rancors, massive predatory creatures, roamed the fungal forests. Carnivorous plants attempted to devour him as he passed. The jungle itself seemed to be testing him, evaluating whether he was worthy to reach its heart. Despite his power and training, Starkiller found himself disturbed by how uncomfortable the darkness made him feel. This confusion angered him, and he channeled that anger into greater ferocity as he fought his way forward. Finally, he reached the ancient abyss, a massive sarlacc pit sacred to the Felucians. The sarlacc was an ancient creature, partially visible above ground with its enormous tentacles and beak-like maw, but most of its body extending deep underground where it had lived for millennia. Standing before this monster was Shaak Ti, the Togruta Jedi Master, with her distinctive montrals and head tails, her twin lightsabers ignited and ready. She looked at Starkiller with profound sadness, recognizing in him the potential he represented and mourning for what he had become under Vader's influence. The duel that followed was the most challenging fight of Starkiller's life to that point. Shaak Ti was everything Vader had promised, a true Jedi Master at the peak of her abilities. Her mastery of Jarkai, the technique of dual-blade combat, allowed her to create an almost impenetrable defensive barrier with her two lightsabers. She moved with fluid grace, her connection to the Force allowing her to anticipate Starkiller's attacks and counter with precision. Moreover, she had the aid of Felucian warriors who attacked from the shadows and the Sarlacc itself, which periodically lashed out with its massive tentacles, trying to drag Starkiller into its maw. Starkiller drew on everything Vader had taught him. He channeled his rage, his hatred, his determination to prove himself. The dark side responded, flooding him with power that made his movements faster, his strikes stronger, his endurance seemingly limitless. He fought not just Shakti, but also the environment, using the Force to deflect or destroy the Sarlacc's tentacles when they threatened him, to blast aside Felucian warriors, to create openings in the Jedi Master's defense. The battle raged across the ancient abyss. Two Force users at the height of their powers locked in mortal combat. Gradually, inevitably, Starkiller's youth and dark side enhancements began to tell. Shakti was powerful and skilled, but she was also exhausted from years of hiding, from the constant vigilance required to avoid Imperial hunters. She had been training the Felucians, trying to preserve some fragment of the Jedi way, and that effort had taken its toll. Starkiller, conversely, had trained his entire life for this moment. He was fresh, fully prepared, and absolutely committed to victory at any cost. His relentless assault eventually broke through Shakta's defense. The killing blow came after Starkiller finally managed to disarm the Jedi Master, sending one of her lightsabers spinning away into the abyss. Wounded and unable to defend herself any longer, Shakti faced her death with the calm acceptance of someone who had always known this day might come. But before Starkiller could deliver the final strike, she spoke words that would haunt him far more than he realized at the time. She told him that the Sith always betray one another. She said he would learn that lesson soon enough. Then, rather than allow herself to be killed by Vader's apprentice, Shakti willingly fell backward into the Sarlacc's maw, choosing the manner of her death even in defeat. Starkiller watched her fall, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and unease. He had done it. He had defeated a member of the Jedi High Council, had proven himself capable of facing the galaxy's finest warriors and emerging victorious. But Shakti's final words lingered in his mind, refusing to be dismissed. The Sith always betray one another. What had she meant by that? Vader wouldn't betray him, would he? They were master and apprentice, working toward a shared goal. Starkiller pushed the doubts aside, refusing to let the Jedi's dying manipulation weaken his resolve. He had completed his mission. That was all that mattered. The first betrayal. When Starkiller returned to the Executor, pride and anticipation filled him. Despite his attempts to maintain the emotional control Vader had demanded, he had done everything asked of him. He had hunted and killed Jedi Masters, had proven himself in combat again and again. Now, finally, the time had come. Vader had promised that once Starkiller completed these trials, they would confront Emperor Palpatine together. The apprentice would stand at his master's side as they overthrew the Dark Lord of the Sith and claimed the galaxy for themselves. Everything Starkiller had endured, every sacrifice he had made, every person he had killed, it had all been leading to this moment. Vader met him on the Executor's bridge, the vast viewport behind him showing the incomplete Super Star Destroyer's skeletal superstructure. Beyond that, space was full of Imperial Star Destroyers more ships than Starkiller expected to see. Before he could ask about the fleet, Vader spoke. The Emperor, the Dark Lord explained, was here. Palpatine's vessels had converged on their location. Starkiller's excitement surged. This was it. The confrontation they had prepared for was about to happen. He asked when they would strike, already calling upon the dark side, preparing himself for the greatest battle of his life. Vader's response shattered everything. The Emperor hadn't been lured into a trap. His spies had followed Starkiller back from Raxus Prime, had discovered the apprentice's existence despite all of Vader's precautions to keep him hidden. Palpatine knew about the secret apprentice, knew about Vader's treachery, and the Emperor was not pleased. Before Starkiller could fully process this revelation, before he could understand what it meant, Vader ignited his lightsaber and drove it through his apprentice's abdomen. The pain was unlike anything Starkiller had ever experienced. Vader's blade burned through flesh and organs, and Starkiller collapsed, unable to comprehend what had just happened. His master, the figure who had defined his entire existence, had just tried to kill him. Through Proxy's holographic projection, Emperor Palpatine appeared in the chamber, his withered face twisted in fury. He accused Vader of treachery, of attempting to overthrow him with this secret apprentice. The Emperor demanded Starkiller's death, and after a brief hesitation that might have been regret or simply calculation, Vader complied. The Dark Lord lifted his fallen apprentice with the Force and proceeded to thrash him about the chamber. Starkiller was thrown into bulkheads, smashed against control panels, battered by telekinetic force that broke bones and ruptured internal organs. He tried to speak, tried to tell Vader that together they could still defeat the Emperor, that they didn't have to do this. But Vader was relentless, continuing the beating until finally, with a contemptuous gesture, he threw Starkiller through the viewport into the vacuum of space. The last thing the apprentice heard before unconsciousness claimed him was the Emperor's sadistic laughter, delighted by this display of absolute loyalty. Starkiller floated in the void, dying, his body broken and his mind shattered by betrayal. Shakti had been right. The Sith had betrayed him. Everything he had believed, everything he had sacrificed, had been a lie. Or so it seemed in those final moments of consciousness, before the darkness took him. He didn't see the retrieval droids that Vader dispatched the moment the Emperor's transmission ended. He didn't know that his master was acting on a plan rather than genuine loyalty to Palpatine. As far as Starkiller knew in those last conscious moments, he had been used and discarded, another victim of Sith treachery. The droids collected Starkiller's body from space and brought it to Vader's personal medical vessel, the Empirical. For 6 months, Starkiller remained in a comatose state, while advanced medical technology repaired the catastrophic damage Vader had inflicted. His body was slowly rebuilt, cybernetic enhancements installed where organic healing wasn't possible, extensive surgery performed to undo the trauma of near death. During this time, Starkiller's unconscious mind was plagued by visions and memories, fragments of his forgotten past mixing with recent experiences, the Force itself trying to show him truths he wasn't yet ready to understand. When Starkiller finally awoke, he found himself restrained on an operating table, staring up at Darth Vader. Rage consumed him immediately. He accused his master of trying to kill him, of betraying everything they had built together. Vader's response was calm, almost patient. The execution had been staged, necessary to convince the Emperor that Vader had dealt with the treasonous apprentice. In reality, Vader had ensured Starkiller's survival. The plan hadn't changed, Vader insisted. They would still overthrow Palpatine. They would still rule the galaxy together, but they needed a new strategy. Vader revealed the next phase of his plan. Starkiller would gather the Empire's enemies into a rebellion uniting dissidents, surviving Jedi, and rebel cells into a cohesive alliance. This rebellion would distract the Emperor, forcing Palpatine to divide his attention while Vader and Starkiller prepared for their final strike. It was brilliant in its way. Use the Empire's enemies as a smokescreen while positioning themselves to attack from within. But Starkiller felt the weight of doubt for the first time in his life. Vader had lied to him before. Why should he believe him now? Vader must have sensed the hesitation because he made his position clear. Starkiller could accept this new mission and continue working toward their goal, or he could refuse and watch everyone who knew about his existence die when Vader destroyed the entire facility. There was no third option. Starkiller, still weak from his injuries and recognizing he had no real choice, agreed to the new plan. But something had changed inside him. The absolute trust he'd had in Vader was gone, replaced by wariness and the beginning of independent thought. For the first time in his life, Starkiller questioned whether his master was telling him the truth. Vader provided him with a new lightsaber and explicit instructions. Starkiller was to sever all ties to his past, to operate completely independently so that no connection could be drawn back to Vader. The apprentice would be entirely on his own, building this rebellion from nothing. As Vader's holographic image faded, leaving Starkiller alone with Proxy on the Imperial, the apprentice realized something profound. He was free, or at least freer than he had ever been. For the first time in his life, he would operate without Vader constantly watching over him, without the immediate threat of his master's displeasure. The question was, what would he do with that freedom? Proxy, loyal and concerned as always, revealed that he had programmed the Imperial to crash into a nearby sun in case Vader tried to kill them both. Despite Starkiller's protests, Proxy insisted they needed to escape. The medical frigate Self-Destruct was already counting down. Among the prisoners being held on the Imperial was someone Starkiller recognized, Juno Eclipse, his pilot. Vader had branded her a traitor for her association with the apprentice, imprisoned her, and marked her for execution. According to the new plan, Starkiller was supposed to abandon her, to sever all ties as Vader commanded. It would be the smart thing to do, the strategic choice. Yet Starkiller found himself unable to leave her behind. He freed Juno from her cell, explaining in minimal terms what had happened and what they needed to do. She was understandably confused and frightened, her entire world having collapsed when Vader declared her a traitor. But she trusted Starkiller enough to follow him, and together with Proxy, they fought their way off the Imperial moments before the ship plunged into the sun. As they escaped in the rogue shadow, Starkiller reflected on his decision to save Juno. He had disobeyed Vader's direct order for the first time in his life. He had chosen compassion over calculated strategy. And somehow, despite everything Vader had taught him, that choice felt right in a way he couldn't fully explain. The seeds of Starkiller's redemption had been planted, though he didn't yet realize it. The weapon Vader had created was beginning to think for itself, to question its purpose, to consider possibilities beyond what it had been programmed to accept. The hunt for Jedi was over. Now came something far more dangerous. The hunt for truth, for identity, for the person Galen Marek might have been if Vader had never found him. But that journey would require allies, would require confronting a past he couldn't remember, and would ultimately require a sacrifice greater than anything Starkiller had imagined. The path forward led into uncertainty, but for the first time, it was a path of his own choosing. Starkiller's first task in building a rebellion seemed almost impossible. He needed to find allies, people willing to stand against the Empire, but his entire life had been spent in service to that same Empire. He knew nothing about rebellion, nothing about inspiring hope or building coalitions. He only knew destruction. Yet, as the rogue Shadow traveled through hyperspace with Juno at the helm and Proxy providing occasional commentary, Starkiller found himself thinking about someone who might help. Ram Kota, the Jedi general he had supposedly killed at Nar Shaddaa, had survived being hurled into space. Imperial intelligence reports suggested he had been rescued by his militia remnants and had gone into hiding, broken but alive. If Kota lived, he might represent Starkiller's best chance at understanding how to create a rebellion. The old Jedi had led troops, had inspired loyalty, had commanded respect. More than that, he had seen something in their duel, had spoken of a future where he and Starkiller were connected somehow. That vision, which Starkiller had dismissed at the time, now seemed potentially significant. So he directed Juno to follow the trail of rumors and intelligence reports, tracking Kota from Nar Shaddaa to Ziost and eventually to Cloud City on Bespin. What Starkiller found in the Vapor Room, a dingy bar in the lower levels of Cloud City, was a shadow of the warrior he had fought. Ram Kota sat alone, surrounded by empty bottles, his force-blinded eyes covered by a dirty cloth. The once proud Jedi general had descended into alcoholism and despair, convinced that his vision of the future had been wrong, that the Empire was invincible, that resistance was futile. When Starkiller revealed himself, Kota initially attacked, blind though he was, his combat instinct still sharp, despite his condition. But Starkiller was faster, more powerful, and he restrained the drunken Jedi without seriously harming him. Starkiller offered Kota a proposition that he himself barely understood. He needed the general's help in fighting the Empire, in building something that could challenge Palpatine's rule. Kota, bitter and broken, laughed at the suggestion. But something in Starkiller's voice, some hint of sincerity or desperation, made the old Jedi reconsider. Perhaps his vision hadn't been entirely wrong. Perhaps there was still a role for him to play. Reluctantly, drunkenly, Kota agreed to help. Though he insisted they would need more than just the two of them, they needed resources, they needed allies with political connections, they needed people who could turn isolated resistance into coordinated rebellion. Kota knew of someone who might help. Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan, one of the few Imperial senators who still believed in the ideals of the old Republic. But first, Starkiller needed to prove he was serious about fighting the Empire. Kota suggested they travel to Kashyyyk, where Organa was supposedly investigating Imperial activities. More importantly for Starkiller, Kashyyyk was significant for another reason entirely. Coda claimed there was something precious there that Starkiller had lost, something that would help him understand his purpose. The mention of Kashyyyk stirred something deep in Starkiller's mind, a flicker of memory too faint to grasp but strong enough to make him curious. When the rogue shadow descended through Kashyyyk's atmosphere, Starkiller experienced a sensation he couldn't explain. The jungle world felt familiar somehow, as if he had been here before even though he had no conscious memory of it. Juno landed the ship near a Wookiee settlement that showed signs of recent Imperial activity. Starkiller disembarked and began searching for any sign of Senator Organa, fighting through Imperial occupation forces that had enslaved the Wookiees and turned their villages into labor camps. The brutality he witnessed here disturbed him more than similar scenes on other worlds, though he couldn't articulate why. Following Coda's guidance transmitted through proxy, Starkiller made his way deeper into the jungle toward coordinates the blind Jedi had somehow known. He found a ruined dwelling, little more than charred wood and broken structures half reclaimed by the forest. Something about this place pulled at him, demanded his attention. As he approached the ruins, the force surged around him, and suddenly he was no longer seeing the present, but experiencing a vision, a memory that had been buried for years. He saw a Jedi Knight fighting Darth Vader, saw the duel from the perspective of a frightened child. He saw his father, though he didn't yet know that's who the Jedi was, fighting desperately to protect his home. He saw Vader strike the Jedi down, saw himself as a child pull Vader's lightsaber away with the Force. The vision shifted, showing him glimpses of his early childhood, of a woman with a yellow lightsaber who must have been his mother. The Force was trying to show him the truth, trying to make him remember who he had been before Vader shaped him into a weapon. The visions became more intense as Starkiller entered the ruined dwelling. He saw himself, or rather a dark vision of what he could become, a Sith warrior dripping with hatred and darkness. This dark version of himself fought against another version, a Jedi version still connected to the light. The two aspects of Starkiller's nature battled across the Force vision, and eventually the dark version won, striking down the light. But then the vision changed, and Starkiller found himself confronting the ghost of his father. Galen Marek's spirit appeared before his son, apologizing for what had happened, calling him by his birth name, Galen. The shock of hearing that name, of suddenly remembering who he had been, overwhelmed Starkiller completely. All the repressed memories came flooding back, his parents, his early childhood, the love and peace he had known before Vader took it all away. He wasn't just Starkiller, the weapon Vader had forged. He was Galen Marek, son of Jedi Knights, a child who had been stolen and twisted into something his parents would have mourned. The revelation shattered everything he thought he knew about himself. Vader had lied about so much, had hidden the truth of Galen's origins to keep him compliant and obedient. Searching through the ruins with new purpose, Galen found his father's old belongings, including a blue lightsaber crystal that Kento had once used. The crystal called to him through the Force, a connection to his heritage and the light side that Vader had tried to sever. Galen pocketed the crystal, a precious link to a past he was only beginning to understand. When he emerged from the ruins, he was no longer quite the same person who had entered. Starkiller had begun the transformation into Galen Marek, though the journey was far from complete. He found Senator Organa being held prisoner by the Imperial forces, rescued him from execution, and freed Princess Leia, who had been captured during her own rescue attempt. Kota, monitoring events through proxy, approved of these actions, but insisted they needed more allies. They needed to show that the Empire could be hurt, that resistance was possible. Kota suggested attacking an Imperial target that would demonstrate vulnerability and rally others to their cause. After consultation with Vader through secret channels, Starkiller agreed to destroy the Imperial shipyard above Raxus Prime, a symbolic target that would prove the Empire wasn't invincible. The gathering of allies. The second mission to Raxus Prime was nothing like the first. Then, Starkiller had been hunting a Jedi. Now, he was fighting to inspire hope. The difference in motivation changed everything about how he approached the task. With Juno piloting the Rogue Shadow, Kota providing tactical guidance, and Proxy offering technical support, they infiltrated the junk world and made their way to the massive ore cannon that fired raw materials to the orbital shipyard. The plan was simple but dangerous. Commandeer the ore cannon and use it to fire a massive projectile directly at the shipyard, destroying it in one spectacular blow. Imperial forces guarded the facility heavily, supported by ATSTs, stormtroopers, and elite commandos. The battle that followed tested Starkiller's abilities in new ways. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for something larger, trying to protect people he was beginning to care about. Juno's voice in his ear, Kota's gruff encouragement, even Proxy's worried comments, they all mattered to him in ways he had never experienced before. During the assault, Proxy's core programming suddenly activated at the worst possible moment. The droid's primary directive to kill Starkiller reasserted itself, and the holodroid attacked using combat modules he had never deployed before. Proxy shifted through forms representing Maris Brood, the Shadow Guards, even Ram Kota and Shakti, testing Starkiller with the fighting styles of opponents he had already defeated. Finally, Proxy assumed the form of Darth Maul and engaged in a vicious lightsaber duel. Starkiller prevailed, but only barely, and the fight left Proxy severely damaged. After defeating his droid companion, Starkiller successfully activated the ore cannon and fired the massive projectile at the orbital shipyard. The impact was spectacular, destroying the facility in a brilliant explosion visible from the planet's surface. But the victory was short-lived. A single Imperial Star Destroyer survived the destruction and began falling toward the cannon facility, still firing its weapons as it descended. Kota shouted that Starkiller needed to use the Force to redirect the falling ship, to turn it away from the facility. The apprentice protested that such feat was impossible. A Star Destroyer massed millions of tons. But Kota insisted, and Starkiller reached out with the Force in desperation. He grasped the falling vessel with telekinetic power, straining with everything he had to alter its trajectory. TIE fighters swarmed around him, firing constantly, but he couldn't afford to divide his attention. The strain was incredible, beyond anything he had ever attempted. His body shook with effort. Blood vessels burst in his eyes from the pressure, but slowly, impossibly, the Star Destroyer began to turn. With a final surge of power that left him gasping, Starkiller pulled the massive warship down into the ore facility, destroying both and barely escaping with his life. The aftermath of that incredible display of power changed something in everyone who witnessed it. Kota's faith in Starkiller solidified into absolute trust. Juno saw him differently, no longer just as Vader's assassin, but as someone fighting for something meaningful. Even Starkiller himself realized that he had abilities that went beyond simple destruction. He could protect people, could accomplish impossible things when fighting for others, rather than just for himself. Finding Proxy still functional despite the damage, Starkiller was relieved to discover that his confrontation with the droid had somehow erased the kill directive. Proxy no longer had to attack his master, and the holodroid seemed almost relieved by this development, despite regretting the loss of his primary function. With the shipyard destroyed and proof that the Empire could be hurt, Kota directed them to contact other Imperial senators who had expressed dissatisfaction with Palpatine's rule. Bail Organa vouched for them, opening doors that would have remained closed to a known Imperial enforcer. They tracked down Senator Mon Mothma of Chandrila and Senator Garm Bel Iblis of Corellia, both of whom had been quietly resisting Imperial overreach through political channels. These experienced politicians saw potential in what Starkiller was building, but wanted guarantees, wanted to know this wasn't just another Imperial trap. As Starkiller met with these future leaders of the rebellion, he found himself changing in fundamental ways. Juno's presence affected him profoundly. She represented everything Vader had tried to suppress: compassion, loyalty based on choice rather than fear, the possibility of connection with another person. Their relationship evolved from professional to personal as they worked together, with Starkiller finding himself caring about her welfare, wanting to protect her, not because she was useful, but because her loss would hurt him in ways he didn't fully understand. Kota, meanwhile, became something like a teacher, though a very different one than Vader. The blind Jedi offered wisdom rather than threats, guidance rather than punishment. He helped Starkiller understand the light side of the Force, explaining principles his parents would have taught him if they'd had the chance. Kota challenged Starkiller to consider what he was fighting for rather than just what he was fighting against. Was this rebellion really about helping Vader overthrow the Emperor? Or had it become something else, something more important? The question haunted Starkiller during quieter moments aboard the Rogue Shadow. He still reported to Vader through encrypted channels, still pretended this was all part of the Dark Lord's grand plan. But increasingly, Galen found himself invested in the rebellion for its own sake. He cared about these people who were trusting him with their lives, who believed in the possibility of a better galaxy. The mask of Starkiller was cracking, revealing the person underneath who had never truly been given a chance to exist. Eventually, all the pieces came together. The rebel leaders agreed to meet on Corellia to formally sign a treaty creating the alliance to restore the Republic. They would unite their separate resistance efforts into a coordinated rebellion, using the resources and connections each brought to create something powerful enough to challenge Imperial dominance. The meeting would be held in secret, with only the core leadership present, along with Starkiller, Juno, Proxy, and Kota. It would be a historic moment, the birth of an organized resistance that would eventually grow into the force that defeated the Empire. The ultimate betrayal. The gathering on Corellia should have been a moment of triumph. The leaders of the future Rebel Alliance stood together, ready to sign the Corellian Treaty that would formalize their unity. Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, Garm Bel Iblis, Princess Leia appearing via hologram through proxy, Ram Kota, Juno Eclipse, and Galen Marek, who had brought them all together. They represented hope, the possibility that tyranny could be challenged. The signing ceremony was about to begin when disaster struck with terrible suddenness. Darth Vader arrived with overwhelming military force. Snowtroopers swarmed the meeting location, surrounding the senators and their small group of defenders. Vader strode into their midst, his mechanical breathing filling the chamber with the sound of death. He explained with terrible clarity that this had been the plan all along. Starkiller had never been meant to overthrow the Emperor. The entire rebellion had been a trap to lure the Empire's most dangerous enemies into one place where they could be captured and eliminated simultaneously. Every moment of freedom Galen had experienced, every choice he thought he'd made for himself, had been orchestrated by Vader to serve this ultimate purpose. The revelation hit Galen like a physical blow. He had been used again, manipulated into betraying people who had trusted him. The senators looked at him with horror and anger, realizing that the one who had brought them together was Vader's apprentice all along. Galen tried to explain, tried to tell them he hadn't known, but the words felt hollow, even to him. How could he not have known? How could he have been so naive as to believe Vader would actually let him go free? Vader moved to execute Galen, ending the loose end once and for all. Before the killing blow could fall, Proxy intervened. The holodroid activated his Obi-Wan Kenobi combat module and engaged Vader in combat, buying precious seconds for his master. The duel was brief. Proxy was no match for the Dark Lord, but those seconds were enough for Galen to recover from his shock. He grabbed Juno and ran, fighting through snowtroopers as Proxy's voice called out one final message. The droid had always regretted failing his primary function, but now he was glad to have failed because it meant he could save his master one last time. Then Vader's lightsaber destroyed Proxy's core, silencing his friend forever. Galen and Juno escaped the trap, but barely. The rebels were captured, bound for transport to the Death Star, where they would be interrogated and publicly executed as a warning to others. Proxy was destroyed. Everything they had built was lost. Galen collapsed after they reached the rogue shadow, overwhelmed by guilt and despair. He had led good people into a trap. He had gotten his only friend killed. Juno tried to comfort him, but words felt meaningless in the face of such betrayal. For the first time in his life, Galen had to make a choice that was entirely his own. No Vader manipulating him, no mission directives to follow, no predetermined path. He could run, could take the rogue shadow and disappear into the Outer Rim, living anonymously and avoiding the Empire's notice, or he could try to fix what he had broken, even if it cost him everything. The choice should have been obvious. Running was a smart move, the one that ensured his survival. But Galen found he couldn't abandon the people who had trusted him, even if that trust had been based on deception. He told Juno he was going to rescue the rebel leaders. She protested, pointing out that infiltrating the Death Star was suicide. But Galen's mind was made up. For once in his life, he was going to do something purely because it was right, not because anyone had ordered him to do it. He was going to act as the Jedi his parents had hoped he would become, rather than as the Sith weapon Vader had created. In that moment of decision, Starkiller truly died. What remained was Galen Marek, accepting his name and his heritage for the first time since childhood. Before entering the Death Star, Galen had one final conversation with Juno. She told him she believed in what they had been fighting for, that the rebellion was real, even if his reasons for starting it had been false. And then, surprising them both, she kissed him. It was Galen's first kiss, the first time anyone had shown him affection that wasn't manipulative or conditional. The moment was brief but profound, crystallizing everything he was fighting for. He was doing this not just to assuage his guilt, but because he had found something worth dying for. The hope that people like Juno represented, the possibility of a better galaxy. The final battle, the Death Star loomed in space, an incomplete sphere of metal that would one day have the power to destroy entire planets. Even unfinished, it was a monument to imperial power, bristling with weapons and swarming with thousands of personnel. Galen infiltrated the battle station using the Force to conceal his presence and his knowledge of imperial security protocols gained during his time as Vader's assassin. He moved through the corridors like a ghost, avoiding patrols when possible, eliminating guards when necessary, always advancing toward the detention level where the rebels were being held. He found them in the Emperor's observation dome, a vast chamber where Palpatine planned to interrogate them personally before their public execution. Ram Kota was there, badly beaten, but still defiant. The senators stood bound, facing death with dignity, and Vader waited, knowing his former apprentice would come, perhaps even hoping for one final confrontation. Galen dropped all pretense of stealth and burst into the chamber, lightsaber blazing, ready to free his friends or die trying. Vader engaged him immediately, and the duel that followed was unlike anything Galen had experienced before. Every previous fight with his master had been a training exercise, with Vader holding back, teaching through combat. Not this time. Now Vader fought with lethal intent, every strike aimed to kill, every Force attack designed to overwhelm. But Galen had changed since their last encounter. He was no longer just drawing on anger and hatred. He fought with purpose, with the desire to protect people he cared about, channeling both his rage at Vader's manipulations and his newfound connection to the light side. The battle raged across the observation dome. Galen discovered that his power, fueled by genuine conviction rather than just dark side corruption, exceeded what he had achieved as Starkiller. He matched Vader blow for blow, eventually driving the Dark Lord back. Support beams fell as their Force powers clashed, debris flying as their lightsabers carved through the chamber. Galen felt no satisfaction in hurting his former master, only grim determination. He didn't want to kill Vader. He wanted to free the rebels, wanted to stop the cycle of manipulation and betrayal. But if Vader wouldn't stand aside, then Galen would do what was necessary. Eventually, Galen managed to overpower Vader, bringing the Dark Lord to his knees and pinning him beneath wreckage. He stood over his defeated master, lightsaber raised, ready to strike. Victory was within reach. But before he could deliver the killing blow, Coda's voice called out to him, begging him to stop. The rebels needed to escape, and killing Vader in anger would mean giving in to the dark side completely. Galen hesitated, torn between his desire for vengeance and the path his parents would have wanted him to take. The moment of hesitation was all Emperor Palpatine needed. The withered Sith Lord appeared in the chamber, and his presence radiated power that made even Vader seem diminished. Palpatine revealed the full scope of his manipulation. He had known about Vader's secret apprentice all along, had allowed the rebellion to form specifically to draw out the Empire's enemies. Now he had them all in one place, and he would either destroy them or, even better, turn Galen back to the dark side and take him as a new apprentice, replacing the crippled Vader with someone more powerful. Palpatine commanded Galen to kill the rebels, particularly to strike down Kota, the last Jedi who had tried to save him. If Galen would embrace his hatred and finish what he started, Palpatine would grant him power beyond imagination. For a moment, Galen genuinely considered it. The dark side called to him, offering strength, offering a way to hurt those who had hurt him. But then he looked at the rebels, at Kota, standing defiant despite his blindness, at the senators who had trusted him despite everything, and he made his choice. Instead of attacking the rebels, Galen turned on Emperor Palpatine. His lightsaber struck the most powerful Sith in the galaxy, and for a moment it seemed he might actually succeed. But Palpatine was too fast, too experienced, too powerful. The Emperor deflected the attack easily and retaliated with force lightning of incredible intensity. The blue-white energy arced through Galen's body, causing agony beyond description. Palpatine laughed as he tortured the young Jedi, mocking him for his pathetic attempt at rebellion against absolute power. Galen endured the lightning, refusing to give Palpatine the satisfaction of hearing him scream. He realized he couldn't defeat the Emperor, not directly, but he could do something else. Drawing on everything his father had taught him through those brief Force visions, channeling both light and dark in desperate measure, Galen began to absorb the lightning. The technique was dangerous, potentially lethal, but it was the only option. He pulled the Emperor's attack into himself, channeling it through his body and storing the energy, rather than letting it destroy him. The absorption had limits. Galen could feel his body breaking down under the strain, knew he couldn't sustain this much longer. But he only needed to hold long enough for the rebels to escape. He called out to Kota, told him to get everyone out while he kept Palpatine occupied. The old Jedi understood immediately. He began herding the senators toward the exit, toward where the rogue Shadow waited, with Juno at the helm. They ran, leaving Galen alone with the two Sith Lords who had defined his existence. Palpatine intensified his assault, pouring more power into the lightning, determined to break his victim. Galen's absorption reached its limit. He couldn't contain any more energy. With a final act of will, he released everything he had absorbed in one massive explosion of Force energy. The blast tore through the observation dome, hurling Vader and Palpatine away from him, destroying much of the chamber, creating enough chaos for the rebels to escape in. The rogue Shadow. The explosion didn't kill the Sith Lords, but it bought the precious seconds needed. As the energy dissipated, Galen collapsed, his body burned and broken beyond repair. He had succeeded. The rebels would escape. The Rebel Alliance would survive to fight another day. He had chosen the light in the end, had become the Jedi his parents wanted him to be. As consciousness faded, Galen Marek felt something he had never truly experienced before: peace, legacy, and rebirth. The rogue Shadow escaped the Death Star with the rebel leaders aboard, but without Galen. Juno was devastated, having lost the man she had only just begun to care for. The senators were somber, recognizing the sacrifice that had saved them. Only Ram Kota seemed at peace with what had happened. He assured the others that Galen was one with the Force now, his suffering finally ended, his redemption complete. The old Jedi had glimpsed Galen's fate long ago in that first duel, had seen that his future involved sacrifice and transformation. Now that future had come to pass. In honor of Galen Marek's sacrifice, the leaders of the Alliance chose his family crest, a symbol they found in his possessions, as the emblem of the Rebel Alliance. The stylized bird in flight would become one of the most recognizable symbols in galactic history, appearing on the uniforms and starships of those fighting against Imperial tyranny. Few rebels would ever know that their symbol represented a man who had been raised as a Sith, who had killed Jedi, but who chose redemption over darkness in his final moments. Galen's story became legend, though the full truth was known only to those closest to him. Aboard the shattered Death Star, Darth Vader stood over Galen's body. The Emperor had survived the explosion and was already plotting revenge against the rebellion, but Vader barely listened. He stared at the corpse of his apprentice, the weapon he had forged, the son he had tried to replace. For a moment behind his mask, Anakin Skywalker grieved for what might have been. Then the moment passed, and Vader was fully in control again. He ordered his stormtroopers to collect Galen's body, not for burial or respect, but for one final use. On Kamino, the ocean world famous for its cloning facilities, Vader began the most ambitious project of his career. He would recreate Galen Marek through cloning, producing a perfect duplicate who would be more obedient, more powerful, more completely under Vader's control. The Emperor, unaware of this continuing treachery, allowed Vader to proceed with his experiments. Palpatine assumed the Dark Lord was simply trying to create loyal soldiers or assassins, not realizing Vader was attempting to resurrect his former apprentice. The cloning process for Force sensitives was incredibly difficult, plagued by problems that didn't affect the cloning of normal humans. The Force itself seemed to resist being duplicated, creating instabilities and aberrations. The first clones of Galen Marek were disasters, deformed and insane, their minds broken by the emotional imprints carried in their genetic memory. These failed clones retained fragments of Galen's memories, his experiences, but lacked the context to understand them. They went mad quickly, consumed by emotions and memories that weren't truly theirs. Vader disposed of the failures and continued trying, adjusting the process, fine-tuning the acceleration techniques. Slowly, the results improved. The clones became more stable, lasting weeks or even months before succumbing to madness. But they all eventually failed, unable to overcome the fundamental problem. Galen's memories included his love for Juno Eclipse, his growing attachment to the light side, his ultimate defiance of the dark side. These emotional imprints kept pulling the clones away from the path Vader wanted them to follow. After months of failures, Vader believed he finally had a breakthrough. Subject 1138 showed unprecedented stability. The clone completed his training exercises, demonstrated the same extraordinary force abilities as the original Galen, and showed absolute loyalty to Vader. The Dark Lord began to believe he had finally succeeded in creating the perfect apprentice. But Subject 1138 had a weakness that Vader discovered too late. During a training exercise designed to test the clone's commitment to the dark side, Vader ordered him to strike down a holographic simulation of Juno Eclipse created by training droids. The clone hesitated, unable to attack the woman his genetic template had loved. Vader declared the clone a failure, another victim of Galen's emotional weakness. The Dark Lord brandished his lightsaber, prepared to execute Subject 1138 and move on to the next attempt. But this clone, unlike the others, chose to fight back. Subject 1138 attacked Vader with desperate ferocity, channeling force lightning that disabled the Dark Lord's cybernetics long enough to blast a hole in the training chamber wall. The clone leaped from the tower into Kamino's perpetual rainstorms, fighting through stormtroopers and Imperial forces as he made his way toward Vader's. TIE Advanced Fighter docked on a nearby platform. Vader pursued, but too slowly. The clone boarded the starfighter and escaped into space, leaving Kamino behind as he began a desperate search across the galaxy for the woman whose memory haunted him. The clone believed he was the original Galen Marek, that he had somehow survived the Death Star and been recovered by Vader for more manipulation. The truth, that he was a copy, grown in a vat and programmed with someone else's memories, was too horrible to fully accept. He clung to the hope that finding Juno would prove his identity, that she would recognize him and confirm that he was real. This hope drove him across the galaxy, even as Vader sent bounty hunters to recapture his escaped creation. The clone's journey led him to Dagobah, where he encountered Jedi Master Yoda, one of the few surviving members of the old Jedi Council. The ancient master saw through the clone's confusion and offered cryptic wisdom about identity and purpose. He suggested that whether the clone was Galen Marek or something new didn't matter as much as the choices he made going forward. The Force had brought him to this point for a reason, and he needed to discover what that reason was, rather than obsessing over questions of authenticity. Eventually, the clone tracked Juno to the Salvation, a medical frigate she now commanded as part of the growing Rebel alliance. Their reunion was complicated by his fractured sense of identity and her grief over the original Galen's death. She wanted to believe he was Galen returned to her, but she also recognized the differences, the confusion in his eyes that the original had never shown. Still, she cared for him, and he cared for her, whether that love was truly his or simply copied from another's memories. The clone's final confrontation with Vader came when the Dark Lord baited him by capturing Juno and bringing her to Kamino. The Rebel Alliance launched an assault on the cloning facility, and in the chaos of battle, the clone fought his way to Vader. Their duel was fierce, with the clone channeling every bit of power he possessed. He fought not just for himself, but for Juno, for the rebels, for the right to define his own existence rather than being defined as Vader's weapon or Galen's copy. The clone emerged victorious, overpowering Vader and taking the Dark Lord prisoner. The rebels escaped Kamino with their prize, and the clone stood with Juno, Ram Kota, and the other survivors, uncertain about his future, but certain about his choice. He had chosen the light, chosen to protect rather than destroy, chosen to be more than what he was created to be. Whether he was Galen Marek resurrected or a new person with inherited memories, he was free to make his own path. The Eternal Legacy. The story of Starkiller, of Galen Marek, of the clone who carried his memories, represents one of the Star Wars Legends continuity's most compelling narratives about identity, redemption, and choice. Though these events exist outside current Star Wars canon, they continue to resonate with fans who recognize the themes they explore. The tale asks fundamental questions about what makes someone who they are. Is it their memories, their genetics, their choices? Can someone born and raised in darkness truly choose the light? Can programming and conditioning be overcome by genuine feeling and moral conviction? Galen's transformation from Starkiller to Jedi Knight parallels the redemption arc of Anakin Skywalker himself, showing that even those most deeply steeped in darkness can find their way back to the light. His sacrifice to save the Rebel Alliance leadership directly enabled the events of the original trilogy, making him one of the unsung heroes of the Galactic Civil War. Without his actions, Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and the others who would lead the rebellion might have been executed on the Death Star, snuffing out organized resistance before it truly began. The relationship between Vader and his apprentice also explores the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker from another angle. Vader sought to create in Galen the perfect tool for his revenge against Palpatine, but in doing so, he essentially recreated the circumstances that had twisted him into a Sith Lord in the first place. He stole a child from his parents, subjected him to brutal training, demanded absolute loyalty, while planning betrayal. The cycle of abuse that defined Vader's fall repeated itself with Galen, and like Anakin before him, Galen ultimately chose love and sacrifice over power and domination. The character of Starkiller remains beloved by many Star Wars fans for his incredible Force abilities, his compelling character arc, and his role in founding the Rebel Alliance. His story has been told through video games, novels, and comics, reaching audiences who appreciate tales of redemption and transformation. The image of him pulling a Star Destroyer from the sky has become iconic, representing the peak of Force power in the Legends continuity. His dual-wielding lightsaber combat style, particularly in the clone story, influenced how fans think about Jedi fighting techniques. While Starkiller doesn't exist in current Star Wars canon, elements of his story have influenced recent Star Wars productions. The themes of questioning one's identity, of breaking free from what others have decided you should be, appear in characters like the Knights of Ren and various Force-sensitive individuals introduced in newer materials. The idea that someone raised by darkness can choose light remains central to Star Wars storytelling, as seen in characters from Kylo Ren to the Inquisitors, who appear in various shows and comics. The tragedy of Galen Marek is that he had so little time to be himself. Most of his life was spent as Starkiller, Vader's weapon, without true choice or identity. Only in the final days before his death did he begin to understand who he was and who he might have become if Vader had never found him on Kashyyyk. The brief glimpses he got of freedom, connection, and purpose made his sacrifice all the more poignant. He gave everything for people he barely knew, for a cause he had only just begun to understand, because in those final moments, he recognized that some things were worth dying for. The clone story adds another layer to this tragedy. Imagine living with someone else's memories, someone else's love, someone else's regrets, and trying to determine which feelings are truly yours. The clone's struggle for identity and self-determination resonates with anyone who has ever questioned whether they're living according to their own desires or simply following paths others have laid out for them. His decision to embrace the light, despite being created as a dark side weapon, suggests that our choices matter more than our origins, that we can always choose to be better than what circumstances try to make us. Looking at the broader picture, the entire Starkiller saga serves as a meditation on the nature of the Force itself. The Force brought Galen and Vader together in that moment on Kashyyyk. It pushed Galen toward redemption despite his dark side training. It created visions that helped him remember his true identity. The Force, in its mysterious way, seemed to have a purpose for Galen that transcended Vader's plans or the Emperor's machinations. Perhaps the Force needed someone who had touched both light and darkness to help create the Rebel Alliance, someone who could understand both sides and choose between them consciously, rather than simply following inherited traditions. The Marek family crest flying on Rebel Alliance ships across the galaxy stands as a testament to the power of individual choice against overwhelming darkness. Every Rebel pilot who wore that symbol, every soldier who fought under that banner, carried forward the legacy of a man who chose redemption over revenge, sacrifice over survival. They carried the legacy of a weapon who refused to remain a weapon, of a slave who chose freedom, of someone born into darkness who walked toward the light, even knowing it would cost him everything. In the end, the story of Starkiller is a reminder that in Star Wars, as in life, it's never too late to choose differently, to become something better than what others made you to be. It's a reminder that love and connection can transform even the most broken souls, that compassion can flourish even in the darkest circumstances, that redemption is always possible for those brave enough to reach for it. These themes have always been at the heart of Star Wars, and Galen Marek's journey embodies them completely. The Force Unleashed may exist in legends now, separate from official continuity, but its impact on Star Wars fandom and storytelling remains. Fans who grew up playing the games, who felt the weight of every choice Starkiller made, who experienced his journey from darkness to light, they carry his story forward. They share it with new generations of Star Wars enthusiasts, keeping alive the tale of how a boy stolen from his parents and raised as a monster found his way back to humanity in his final hours. So as you drift toward sleep, remember the story of Galen Marek, remember Starkiller, remember the clone who carried his memories, remember that in a galaxy filled with impossible odds and overwhelming darkness, individual choices still matter. Remember that redemption is real, that love is powerful, that sacrifice for others gives life meaning. Remember that we are defined not by how we begin, but by the choices we make along the way and how we choose to end our stories. May the Force be with you always as you journey through your own darkness toward whatever light you choose to embrace. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Starkiller's complete history, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell so you never miss future explorations of Star Wars lore. What other characters or storylines would you like us to explore? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Until next time, may your dreams be filled with the endless possibilities of that galaxy far, far away.